You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we've got an amazing author on the show today. Your mind's going to be blown on what you're going to learn today, and you're going to learn so much stuff. You know, you're going to be more sexy to all the people in your life. They're just going to be like, you have this glow of intelligence and sexiness that just emulates off you. Is emulate the right word? I don't even know what I'm talking about. We improv the ramble every time, folks. If you haven't been here for the last 13 years, that's what we do. We try and make something funny. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's stupid, and sometimes the stupid is funny. I don't know what it means. Anyway, guys, welcome to the show. We have the newest book that's coming out November 15th, 2022, Personality and Power, Builders and Destroyers of Modern Europe. We're going to be talking about this amazing book today, History. The most important thing you can learn about history is what's my old saying? The one thing man can learn about his history is that man never learns about his history. Thereby, we just keep repeating it. So you want to learn history so that you don't keep repeating it, people. Let's try and do that one of these decades, centuries, years, the folly of man, if you will. In the meantime, you know the drill. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss to see everything we're reading and reviewing over there. Go to our groups on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, youtube.com/Chris Voss. You can see everything that's going on there for the show to your family, friends, and relatives as well. Ian Kershaw is on the show with us today. He is the leading disciple of German historian Martin Borchardt, and until his retirement, he was a professor at the University of Sheffield. He's also a Sir. He's been knighted by the Queen, so we want to pay him some ultra respect, just in case, I don't know, Britain decides to invade us. We don't want that happening. Kershaw was named. Kershaw has called Borchardt an inspirational mentor who did much to shape his understanding of Nazi Germany. He served as a historical advisor on numerous BBC documentaries, notably The Nazis, A Warning from History, and War of the Century. He taught a module titled Germans Against Hitler. He was born in 1943. He's an English historian whose work has chiefly been focused on social history of the 20th century Germany. He's regarded as one of the world's leading experts on Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, and is particularly noted for his biographies of Hitler. Welcome to the show, Ian. How are you?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Yes, I'm very well. Thank you.
There you go. It's wonderful to have you. And hey, America, we just voted over here, and we took a step away from fascism. Are you proud of us?
I thought it was a good result. Yes, I don't like to comment too much on the internal politics of another country, but I was very quietly pleased with what happened last night.
Yeah. All of my friends have been writing me around the world going, what the hell's going on over there? What drugs are you on? And of course, it's fentanyl. So there you go. So Ian, I understand you don't have some placards on the internet, but let's plug your book. Where can we find your book?
I imagine it's available on Amazon or wherever. Should be in all good bookshops soon, I suppose. Usual cliche.
You sound like you're not really sure. You don't trust those book publishers to put it on Amazon. Or maybe you don't care.
Well, I just leave it to them. Yes, they want to.
You're like, I got paid. If they want to sell it on Amazon, go ahead. Anyway, we're just being funny here. So, Ian, what motivated you want to write this book? You've written a lot of books. How many books have you written, and what motivated you to write this book?
How many have I written? I'm not sure. Maybe about 15 or 16.
There you go.
But anyway, why I decided to write this book was that I'd written two lengthy books in the preceding few years on the history of Europe in the 20th century. And all the characters who figure in this book were, of course, in those two volumes. But those are sort of panoramic histories of Europe. And I didn't have that much time to deal with the individuals in sufficient depth. So I decided in the end that I'd write a book which looked at the 20th century through the impact of these individuals. And I chose 12 European individuals to focus upon. And the book arose from that background, really.
Nice. And so what can we learn from history? What was the scope of the book? Give us some in-depth story. You cover Churchill. Who are some of the other leaders that you cover in the book?
Well, I take it really through the centuries. So start with Lenin, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, de Gaulle, and then on to the post-war era, Adenauer, the leader of West Germany in the immediate post-war era, Franco, the Spanish dictator, Tito, the Yugoslavian leader, Margaret Thatcher, the one woman in the book, then Gorbachev, and finally the German Chancellor of the 1980s and 90s, Helmut Kohl.
Wow. Now, the title of the book is Personality and Power, Builders and Destroyers of Modern Europe. In the scope of that and the leaders that you profiled, did you profile them as builders and destroyers, or some of these folks were builders and some of these folks were destroyers?
Well, some were obviously destroyers, think no further than Hitler in that regard. Some were builders, and you can speak of maybe the West German leader Adenauer in the same country, but the Adenauer then built West Germany from scratch, really, after 1945. And some were builders and destroyers. So if you want, you could look at Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, the last Soviet leader, who was a builder of Europe in certain ways, gave many millions of people in Central and Eastern Europe freedom, and yet destroyed his own country. So a builder and a destroyer. So each of the three categories figures, I think, builders, destroyers, and both builders and destroyers.
There you go. One thing I learned about leaders, whether it's a CEO, I learned a lot about leadership and CEOs, and builders and destroyers. And one thing I learned is there were some leaders that they have a penchant to be able to really build, grow things, and design things, but they also have a very destructive dark side. Steve Jobs had a dark side. I imagine a lot of the people you've talked about in the book, there's kind of that light side where they're that great leader, great builder, but there's kind of a destruction, that almost a destructive sort of landscape or hurricane that rides behind them in the darkness of their personalities, that almost sometimes seems to overtake them. They seem to stay one step ahead of it, or sometimes it does overtake them. Is that a good analogy?
Yes, I think it is. Obviously, in this book, I go a lot into the preconditions of leadership, and crisis is a current that runs right through the book. So each of these leaders is a product of crisis. And crisis produces different sorts of leaders, and some of them have a dark side which is subordinate to a positive side, you might say. Someone like Churchill, for instance, we could put it that way. Others have obviously a prominent and totally comprehensive dark side, which is absolutely to the fore right from the beginning. But that's the way we see it historically. At the time, of course, people with what you might call a dark side themselves might be very appealing to large numbers of people, given the nature of the crisis that they're facing. And so what works in one society doesn't work in the other. But what you can say is that each of these individuals has particular leadership characteristics which are not common to every individual. And those characteristics, an instinct for power, lust for power, determination, and so on, many other characteristics, which are often very negative ones, can be very positive in a particular set of conditions for the audience that is being appealed to.
There you go. So did you find that a lot of these personalities had consistent traits? Were they, did some people really think maybe at the beginning of their run, they were trying to do the right thing? Say maybe Stalin or someone, they were like, I'm trying to do the right thing, trying to build a better company, and then, or better, country. And then, the whatever, their narcissism overwhelms them, or they think they're doing good and they end up not, even though they think they're trying to do the right thing.
Well, someone like Stalin or Hitler, they they of course they had ideals for what the new society was they were attempting to build, but the negative side was always built into that as well. So right from the beginning, the negativity, the exclusion of enemies of that state or enemies of that people was very prominent in their appeal. And it was a very successful part of their appeal, given the nature of the crisis that they faced at the time. People bought into that, the fact that they wanted to destroy as well as to build.
Yeah, there's a real destruction quality, and it's really interesting how they seem to stay ahead of it. Like Steve Jobs was most people found out about his dark side after he passed, and books are written about what a jerk he was. Some people kind of knew it that worked with him as he was going, but there's this revereness that people have, almost hero worship people have to some of these leaders, and they don't know the dark side. Like an example might be Hitler, where a lot of German people either turned a blind eye or didn't understand how much horror he was committing. And when we liberated Nazi Germany, they made the German people watch the videos of the Holocaust and the fallout from all the stuff they did, and made them be educated on what Hitler had done. And then some of the shine, I'm sure, came off of their minds that maybe Hitler wasn't that great of a guy for them.
Well, just a couple of remarks about Hitler, which your comments have just stirred in me. One is that in free elections before he came to power, Hitler never won a majority support of the German people. So the most that he won was in 1932, where just over a third of the German people supported him. Mm-hmm. So once he got into power, then of course the scope was available for him to extend this hold on power by destroying his enemies, political enemies first and foremost, and by repression and by monopoly control of the media, he was able to create this image for himself then of the supreme leader, of the almost deified image. And that for the other dictators as well, that once they have power, they're able to have a monopoly control of the mass media to build up this glorified image of themselves, which is a completely fabricated image. So we have to bear that in mind. And then also the process which develops then, a radicalizing process that people in the early 1930s in Germany were fully aware that the Nazi Party was an anti-Semitic party, but that didn't deter them from voting for it, because they saw the Jews as part of the crisis of the part of the evil that they faced in their own society. Complete lunacy, of course. It was not that at all. But that's the image which they had, and it didn't deter anybody from voting for the Nazis at that time, who supported generally the aims that Hitler stood for. Later on, of course, the radicalization of those policies then led to the Holocaust. And once that, after the war, people were only too keen to distance themselves from the horrors which were now being brought home to them, and which they realized had taken place in their own by their own government, with them supporting large parts of what that government seemed to stand for.
Yeah, you'd think that we would have learned over time that politicians, going back eons of time, have always played that game with usually the immigrant. They're like, that new person over there who just showed up. Yeah, they're the person who's stealing from you. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're picking the pockets of everybody who's looking over there and stealing from them. And we don't seem to learn this lesson. The thing you're talking about, where people create this false image and this glorious leadership, and it becomes this cult of personality. It rings really true of what's going on here in America. You write about Mussolini, and one of the things that's been echoing through our brain over here in America as doing this voting in 2022 is, are people willing to give up capitalism for the trains to run on time? Because that was the big thing about fascism. Well, fascism, people are bad and there's some grift, but the trains run on time. The economy works. And that's, I think, with Hitler, they wanted the economy to work. They were in a bad economy, especially from the post-war World War I fallout. Same with Mussolini. And so, people in these situations are willing to say, well, if we can have jobs and we can have the trains run on time, we'll give up some freedom, and then it becomes a slippery slope.
That's exactly right, and which we're seeing in of course today with populist leaders today, that the readiness to give them support and to put them in positions of power without any possibility then of controlling what they do once they're in power. So it's a very dangerous trend, and that's in the 1920s and 1930s, when democracy was far flimsier than it is today. Then it was even more dangerous, and you gave then scope. And Hitler, one of his speeches I remember in 1932, there were 40,000 people there assembled for one of his open-air speeches, and he said very openly, "I'm going to destroy democracy. I'm going to sweep it away, sweep all the parties away," and the crowd cheered like mad.
Wow.
So that's a very popular message, you see. And as you said, the notion that somebody will put things right for you in the depths of a crisis, some great hero will come along and put things right for you, will rescue the nation. It's a very dangerous message.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Was Pinochet a consideration for this book? It seems like he would be a good addition, but you only have so much time to write and size. Would Pinochet have been a good add to this book, or?
Yes, it could have been, and so would other non-European leaders. I really wrestled with these thoughts for quite some time, and one of them that I particularly concerned me was whether or not I shouldn't include Roosevelt in this, because he obviously played a significant part in the Second World War in Europe and contributed to the reshaping of Europe after the Second World War. I thought about it, and I decided in the end that I would. I had to concentrate really on European leaders. And so my criterion was that they should be European leaders of government or of the state. And I just thought, well, if I then start including Pinochet or Roosevelt or anybody else for that matter, Mao Zedong and so on, the book would become endless. It's big enough.
I was going to say you can save this for book 2 and 3, but no, that makes sense. I mean, Europe has been the central format for a lot of this stuff in the shaping of the world, especially in the 20th century, and everything that's gone on there. What were some? Was there any stories or any things that you learned that you didn't know about that are in the book that we can tease out that you were kind of surprised by? You're like, wow, I didn't know about that.
Well, I've worked on this stuff for a long time, so there was no sort of earth-shattering thing that I thought have never occurred to me before, but. But I did learn new things about, I think, about each of the leaders that I was dealing with. Maybe not Hitler, but the other ones. Got Hitler, I'd written specialized works on before. But on the others, I think I learned something new. But the one who I think I learned most about was Tito, since apart from giving lectures in university and so, I'd never done anything on Tito before. And I thought an intriguing character who fought during World War II, fought in as a war leader and also a civil war leader, because he was up against enemies within his own state. And then his exploits as a war leader brought him to power in Yugoslavia. He almost single-handedly held that regime together for the next 30 odd years. And when he died in 1980, the thing was already starting to crumble, and then crumbled within 10 years of his death into the state where Yugoslavia ceased to exist and where it fell apart in warfare. So his legacy was extremely short, but the shortness of his legacy demonstrates the importance of his individual contribution to history. So I think probably I learned most that was new about Tito.
Is there something, as you wrote about these leaders, is there something that voters need to know or need to watch out for better? You mentioned earlier on, the personality, the faux personality, the glorification personality, the worshiping, the cult of personality sort of image that these people put on themselves. Do you find that most of these leaders are narcissists? And then are there things that voters should watch out for?
Yes, they are. Egocentrism, bordering on narcissism, is a characteristic feature of practically all of these individuals. Even the ones in democracies have this element in their character. So that's absolutely right. And I think what voters today should really look out for above all is actually to be really extremely critical of everything that they read that political leaders say. Be actually critical and cynical about it, and disbelieve most things that are said. And especially now in the age of fake news and social media, I think it's more than ever important that people are critical about the stuff that they read and what politicians say, especially if they're offering what seem to be panacea solutions for really complex problems that we all face in our societies.
Yeah, we saw that over here. Just inject bleach and everything will be fine. It was crazy. You really got to see what happens when fascist sort of grift and corruption are able to run rampant. As you study these folks, we have a lot of great journalists that come on the show that have written books, and they go to the White House and they interview the press and everything over there. Is one of the big core elements really true for America, that the press and the protection of the press that's given under our First Amendment is one of the things that has kept our thing going, as opposed to some of these other countries that you wrote about?
The protection of the press and the freedom of speech are absolutely essential parts of a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Where they start to become a problem is in the extremes of free speech, which you can find now in social media, which can be very harmful. So it's really a moral question as to where then, if at all, you draw the line with free speech. Is any sort of speech permissible? Well, it isn't, is it? Even now, because we prevent certain forms of hate speech, even as we speak, and so. That is really one of the big ethical problems of today's societies, I think, where we actually draw the line, especially on social media. But in essence, free speech, as you quite rightly say, is pivotal to the sort of power that a modern democracy has, and has kept those modern democracies in business. Whereas if you look at when a dictatorship comes to power, an authoritarian rule, the first thing they do is to block free speech and to prevent opponents of that regime from having their say. So free speech is absolutely essential as a basis of democracy.
And the protection of that in the Constitution. We saw the same sort of thing that I believe Hitler was up to, or Goebbels was up to, where we started getting called fake news and, don't trust what's going on in the media. We've got, of course, some state media with Fox News and stuff. One thing that was interesting you brought up is how, we should limit certain amounts of hate speech, or certain amounts of really, there is a point where free speech is free, and there's a point where we need to say, hey, we can't have that. And that's kind of an argument that's going on here in America with the advent of Twitter, if you've been following that, and how Elon Musk has taken that over, and he believes in free speech and that anyone should be able to say anything. And then when you study, and I'm sure you have with your study of Germany and Hitler, over in Germany, you can't say certain things. You can't even raise your hand and do the Hitler sign. They ban that, there's free speech, but there's certain elements of hate speech that go too far. And one thing I was recently, and so this discussion has been going on in America, and I'm sure it plays into the study of what you wrote about. But I was exposed recently to this thing from Karl Popper, if you're familiar with him, the paradox of tolerance.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. And he talks about how unlimited tolerance can lead to the disappearance of tolerance, and that we need to have, as a tolerant society, we can have free speech, but we cannot tolerate the intolerant people.
Mm.
What are some of your thoughts on that from what you wrote about in the book? And does that need to be an important thing, that we say, hey, it's great that we have free speech, but once we start being intolerant, once we start saying, ugly things, this person is the problem, that person is the problem, we start saying we can't have these people around, et cetera, that becomes intolerant and dangerous.
I think the question of where you draw the line in free speech has become one of the major ethical problems in every functioning liberal democracy today, and it's one which is very difficult to define in an abstract sense. But we have to have levels of intolerance towards the unspeakable, really, and I think in practice we do that already. There are certain things that we wouldn't want to have said on whatever media in front of our children or grandchildren or something. Certain things which we would draw the line at with personal attacks on other individuals, on minorities, on women, on ethnic minorities, and so on. So we have that already implicit in our own minds. The question is where you draw the line in any legislation on that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you don't want to prevent people from speaking out, and the freedom of speech, which, as we just said, is absolutely essential for the functioning of a democracy. On the other hand, we can't have that giving rise to such intolerable expressions that they are really then destroying the very thing we want to preserve. So it is really a thorny issue, but one which the prevalence of social media has given rise to in a way which didn't really exist to anything like the same extent beforehand.
Yeah, and we've learned that through, what you've written about in the study of Europe, Hitler, Mussolini, and other things, that how dangerous this speech can be because it spreads and it infects. And, we recently saw with Kanye West where he made some comments about Jewish people that were hateful and anti-Semitic. And within 24 hours, we saw people putting up hate speech against Jewish people on freeways. And so you see how immediately it spreads and infectious, and it gives people license to be hateful. But I like the Karl Popper thing that I just recently was exposed to, because I'm like, that seems to be the level of where when we say you're being intolerant of someone else and you want to destroy them or remove them, then that's probably a problem. In America, we've had this thing called cancel culture, where almost any idea or trying to debate any ideas become deemed intolerable sometimes by our blue left-wing class of the Democrats that I'm a part of. They get shouted down at college. And I mean, there's certain elements that need for debate, but then there's certain times where you're just pointing at someone and going, I hate you, and here's some hate speech and stuff. What are the lessons or tease outs do you think people learn from the book?
The lessons that what? Sorry, I didn't catch it.
Were there lessons or little tease out tidbits? Any stories that you want to share from the book that can entice people to go buy it?
Well, I think you hit upon a number of issues there, which arise from working on the 20th century, which have a different salience in the 21st century. There were no social media then, but thank goodness. But the notion what Goebbels would have made of social media, I don't know why it would have been a help for him in certain ways, a handicap in other ways, I suppose. But then the monopoly control of the press then highlighted some of the issues you've just been talking about. But what issues can we, what points can we draw from this book about the 21st century? Well, I think I've already alluded to them. The need to be very careful and critical in understanding, in reading social media and using social media, both in terms of tolerance of speech, but also in terms of understanding the political messages which have been distributed through social media. And it was bad enough when you had a normal print media that were telling lies and so on all the time. But now with social media, where, as you just said, an issue can be raised, and then within seconds or minutes at the latest, then it can be spreading like wildfire on social media, and it poses real problems for today's politicians, and also, as you say, the cancel culture, which has crossed the pond, as with us here in Britain too. It's really a very dangerous notion there that you have difficulties in expressing views which are rejected by some people, and therefore they want to stop you expressing those views at all. On the other hand, there have to be certain things where you have to draw the line. We're back to the issue of free speech and what it means.
Mm-hmm. And then you have politicians that use that as a weapon. They weaponize it and spread the lies around the world. And there you go. Mark Twain, the famous quote, "A lie can travel around the world and back again while the truth is lacing up its boots." I think there's another version of that attributed to Churchill, but it is Mark Twain. Winston Churchill, "Lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on," is attributed to Churchill. It's amazing how fast hate can spread on these social media forums, how fast lies can spread. We've even seen gunmen that have gone and shot up places in terrorist activities and broadcast on social media. And there's, by the time these social media companies can, stop it, squelch it, censor it so that sort of ugliness isn't shared, it's too late. It's already gone around the world a million times. Everyone's seen it and been exposed to it. And I think your point is really important. We have to be, each of us, the best arbitrators of history and what's come before us, and understand what the angles are. I mean, I grew up in religion, so to me, when you come at me with anything, I go, "What's your angle? What are you selling? What's your motivation? What are we up to here?" That's kind of how my whole build is with my brain. But most people don't have that. They seem to be more just open vessels of whatever politicians want to dump it in their brain. They go, "Okay."
Well, people, generally speaking, want to have their own daily problems solved, don't they? And if their daily problems are severe, and it seems as if our democratic society is not providing answers for those daily problems that they face, then they will look for someone or something which does offer the seeming solution. And often solutions are very simplistic ones, which don't last the test of time and will then fade as soon as they come up against reality. But they can attract large swathes of support, as you've just been saying, through social media now in particular. But as you see from these historical examples that we've been talking about, really, in the case of the rise to power of the Nazi Party in Germany, then even without social media, there was the possibility then of attracting large numbers of people by hate speech, by political hate speech, because the problems that people faced in their daily lives were acute and they wanted a solution. They were prepared then to trust that solution to Hitler with devastating, catastrophic effect.
One of the most extraordinary things about Hitler was a lot of the Nazi people knew what was going on. And one of the historians that we had come on, you probably have covered it. The German people would have the ash fall into their cities from the Holocaust ovens, and they knew what was going on. They knew that was ash of Jews, and they would keep the children home for the day. They would sweep it up, and that's just one thing that's always stuck with me when I heard about that. I was like, my God, the inhumanity and the horror of that. And I can't remember, they would call it there was a term that I think they had for it when the ash would fall. But
so you just need to be a little bit careful about that, though, because the concentration camps were set up in Germany. They were meant to be known about. They were to incarcerate enemies of the state and so on within Germany. The death camps were placed out in mainly in Poland, and so when Germany had conquered parts of Poland, of course, in fact the parts that weren't taken over by the Soviet Union. So there were places there, such as the town that close to Auschwitz, where they could not have been but aware of the numbers of prisoners who were going to Auschwitz. But Auschwitz was a long way from somewhere like Cologne, for example. So somebody from Cologne said they'd no idea that what was going on in Auschwitz. They might have been telling the truth. They might not. It's difficult to know, of course, because after the war, people told a very apologetic stories about what was going on. But it's also, we can't just presume that these death camps were necessarily widely known amongst the entirety of the German population. That's the only point I make.
Yeah, there's the old saying by Dennis Miller: "No one finds Christ on prom night in the back of the car." It's only when you've been found out as committing a crime that you go, "Oh, wow, now I apologize." To your earlier point, you bring up that people want their daily problems solved. I'm always reminded by that scene from the movie Network, where I just want my lazy boy recliner, and I want my TV, and I want my beer, and I want you to leave me alone. I want my radial tires. Just for the love of God, please give me some space. And there comes a point where people break. But we just went through that moment as a if you're looking at what we're going through, the Republicans were talking about pulling back from Ukraine and our funding of it. I'm sure that Putin was sitting there going, ha, 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 ha. And we were sitting here as a democracy going, are people going to vote for the trains to run on time in a fascist government? Or are they going to say, we're going to tighten our belt, we're going to take some gas prices, we're going to take some inflation, and we're going to vote for the Constitution? And it appears that they largely did across the board.
Yes.
The Republicans are stunned. And it was interesting to me that the day after, Putin says he's retreating and has also been signaling, negotiating, and how much, whatever that is, you can put stock in whatever. but it was interesting to me that was his announcement the day after, and I don't think it would have been the same announcement if things had gone with the huge red wave that we were anticipating. But it speaks to what you were saying. People will sometimes be willing to sell out their freedoms for a good paycheck.
Yes, well, so far anyway, it's been very heartening to see what solidarity there's been in Europe as well as in the Western world more generally in support of Ukraine. We are being put under some sort of test, aren't we, in every country with what people will tolerate in the long run with regard to energy prices and the rest of it. But so far, anyway, the resilience has been very strong and the readiness to support Ukraine. And as you said, the implications for the war and for the outcome of the war remain to be seen. Let's hope for the best in that. And at the minute, it's still impossible to say how this war will come to an end. But wars normally end through some sort of settlement or negotiated truce or peace. And I'll be surprised if this one doesn't end in the same way eventually.
I'm sure you wrote in the book about, or you've talked about in your prior books about how they tried to appease Hitler by going, well, give him, what was it, Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia, or there was initially with countries, they're like, well, let him have that one, just let him appease him. And as you mentioned earlier, we've done a very different approach with Ukraine, where we've said no moss, no quarter. We're not giving you that country. And we saw, and I believe there was data and intelligence that laid out that he intended to continue if he took Ukraine.
Yes, I think the use of these historical terms to describe what's going on in today's world is sometimes a problem. And we see that along the line that we're always very anxious. Is Putin another Hitler? Is it the same as Hitler? Is it the same? And it may be best just to say, well, history shows us how we've got where we are. History can show, to some extent, it can help us to understand where Putin is coming from and what his own views are on this and how he's going to proceed. But to use terms like appeasement with regard to today's dealings with Putin might be misleading, because after all, we've just been talking about the differences between the 20th and 21st century when it comes to social media and media in general. But if we look at weapons, the obvious difference is that Putin has got nuclear weapons. And so it seems to me that the line that the West has been taking, which is offering a lot of support for Zelensky and for Ukraine, but falling short of any intervention within Russia itself, which might provoke a disastrous response, has been on the whole a very rational and sensible one. And I hope that we can keep that up. And the signs that it's paying some sort of dividends, and let's hope that Ukraine prevails in this war against Putin. But I think I'm just a little bit against these anachronistic comparisons. Something happened in the 20th century. Let's just extrapolate from that and say this is what we need to do today or what we don't need to do today. The world's a very different place now.
There you go. What do you think about Italy? You've written about Mussolini. What do you think about Italy returning to Mussolini's party 50, 70, 100 years later?
Well, it's not exactly doing that. I think Giorgia Meloni has a neo-fascist past. Everybody's aware of that. But she's now taken over as the head of government in Italy. She's some difficulty in forming a coalition. In itself, that may be a good thing to prevent some really pro-fascist tendencies from taking over. Governments in Italy tend to be of short duration, and it may be that Giorgia Meloni is also able to form a government only of brief duration. And then also Italy today, unlike Italy in Mussolini's time, is part of the European Union, which offers its own constraints on the exercise of power. And Giorgia Meloni is now actually, she was very anti-European Union at one time, but she's now actually backtracked a little bit on that and is making compromises there too. So it's not a very appealing development in Italy. That's putting it very mildly. And Giorgia Meloni and her government can do some damage, doubtless, to a number of policies in Italy. But I'm sort of slightly optimistic, nonetheless, that the democratic constraints will prevail and prevent her from entertaining particularly harmful policies.
That's good.
I mean, I was just about to add that we have the example in Central Europe of Hungary, which claims to be an illiberal democracy and has very populist and some very unattractive tendencies indeed, and is a thorn in the side of the European Union. But I think, with luck anyway, the Meloni experiment will come and go, and no lasting or massive damage will have been incurred. But that's my hope rather than any prognosis of what will happen.
Yeah. I mean, Brazil and us, we just dodged a bullet by the thinnest of margins. And hopefully we can maintain that. And I think the youth finally stepped in to vote, which is important because it's their future. And they see things very differently than the older generation, my generation, does. A lot of my generation was still came up in that kind of racist era. And I washed myself of it decades ago, but it seems like a lot of my other folks in my age range didn't. So there you go. Well, this has been very insightful. I really encourage people to read your book, because the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. And thereby we just go round and round. That's my favorite quote that I run off. Anything more you want to tease out or touch on about the book?
Well, no, I'm very grateful for this chance to talk to you about it and talk about other things. And I have to say, as regards the midterm elections, that I think Europeans in general are very, very glad that the results came out in the direction that they did, and that offers good hope for democracy in the USA, and that's the most important democracy in the world. So it's crucial that the American Constitution survives and thrives, and that democracy continues to be a model for the rest of the world, and rather than a possible horror story. So I'm cautiously optimistic now about the developments in America.
There you go. What do you think about what's going on there? Where you guys have been using 10 Downing Street as an Airbnb. What's going on over there in Europe? Is it's going to settle down or what?
One thing for sure is that there won't be a chapter on any subsequent book on Liz Truss. So it's been a political pantomime and great political sport, no doubt. But it's been our country that's been ruined in the process. That's the thing. Yeah. So we need some stability. We need some sensible grown-up politicians to do some grown-up things, I think, and get away from all this nonsense.
There you go. Maybe the Brexit thing was a bad idea at this point. Maybe that's the call.
My view, not just at this point in my view, but one thing is, I mean, deciding what are the negative consequences of Brexit has been difficult to establish, because since then we've had COVID. We've had the pandemic, and we've now had the war in Ukraine. So both of those had very negative impacts upon British and European politics and economics. And so trying to decipher precisely from within that what the impact of Brexit has been quite difficult. But I was a very staunch opponent of Brexit at the time, and remain so to this day. Yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of the players are starting to fall out that were the proponents of it. They're starting to fail out, and hopefully, I mean, it's been a very bad few years, so hopefully we'll survive them. Knock on wood.
It's been a continuing crisis for the last 15 years.
There you go. Well, we want to give you more books you can write, so we'll make more history. How's that sound? Well, Ian, it's been an honor to have you on the show, sir. We certainly appreciate you coming on and your insightful mind. I really encourage people to read the book. I learned so much from historians. I love reading history books, and we've had a lot of historians on the show, and it's so important to understand what's going on in your world today and what politicians are up to, what power is up to, what leaders of business are up to. By studying the past, by studying leaders in the past and what they've done. Of course, you profiled Churchill in my book, which is a big favorite of mine. Love Churchill. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on, Ian. We really appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Enjoyed talking to you.
There you go. And be sure to order up the book, guys, wherever fine books are sold. Stay on those alleyway bookstores. They're a bit dangerous. But go wherever fine books are sold. Order up the book, Personality and Power, Builders and Destroyers of Modern Europe by Ian Kershaw. Sir Ian Kershaw, that is, to those of you in the British realm. Thank you for coming by, everybody. We certainly appreciate it. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, goodreads.com/Chris Voss, all those crazy places we are on the internets. Be good to each other, stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.